have heard of WHMIS in the past. You might even have seen images representing threats associated with certain kinds of materials. But do you know what WHMIS is all about? In this short video, we'll speak a little bit about the background to WHMIS, some recent changes to the system, how it's enforced and regulated in Canada, and what it all boils down to. Actually, that last part, what it all boils down to, can be summarized very easily. It all boils down to keeping workers and others safe. Imagine a situation where different organizations try to label certain materials as dangerous or hazardous, but with no real guidelines. A shipper in Asia might warn people that the materials he's shipping are corrosive, but when it reaches its destination in America or in the Middle East, no one can read the warning because they don't understand Chinese. Or a North American shipper who thinks it's obvious what dangerous or flammable is, but doesn't understand that a worker in Brazil doesn't know a word of English. WHMIS is a system which helps eliminate the communication problems which could arise as a result of cross-border trade. WHMIS ensures that a standardized set of warnings exist which can easily be seen and understood by anyone, regardless of location or language. WHMIS first came into being in 1988. At that time, there were three key elements to the program. One, to establish a standardized method of classifying hazards. Two, to create recognizable labels which can easily identify any risk associated with a container. And three, creating material safety data sheets known as MSDSs. These are information guides which clearly convey the specific hazardous ingredients which might be contained in a particular material and what to do in case of exposure. Basically, WHMIS was and is a system of educating workers on how to protect themselves from exposure to certain risks. In Canada, WHMIS is implemented through coordinated efforts by the Canadian federal, provincial, and territorial governments. By doing so, governments can avoid duplication of rules and regulations and as well can prevent potential problems which might be created if each province were to set up its own independent warning systems. The federal government, through Health Canada, administers the Hazardous Product Act, HPA, and the regulations established under that act, part of which establishes labeling requirements for manufacturers and suppliers, and it ensures the availability of material safety data sheets. The task of Health Canada is, in part, to coordinate between the levels of government in maintaining contact with key industry and labor stakeholders. Every province and territory in Canada has established certain WHMIS requirements with which employers are obligated to comply. For those workplaces under federal rather than provincial jurisdiction, the program is administered through Social Development Canada. In short, the requirements established ensure that responsibility is placed on workplaces to make sure controlled substances or hazardous products which might be stored, used, handled, or disposed of at every workplace are properly labeled and that they identify any potential threats which might be posed. Moreover, these workplaces must ensure that they have MSDSs on hand, which are made available to workers. The goal is to make sure workers are educated and trained in the safe storage, use, handling, and disposal of dangerous products. WHMIS.org is a government website which provides details on WHMIS requirements in different locations across Canada. Finally, you should know that on occasion there is a conflict between the rights of workers to know what they are exposed to against the right of manufacturers to keep certain proprietary information about the ingredients in their products confidential. When such a conflict exists, a mechanism is provided to resolve any conflicting concerns. In 2015, the Hazardous Product Act, or HPA, was amended, allowing the Canadian government to proceed with certain regulations needed to implement the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, also known as the GHS. Subsequently, WHMIS was modified to include the GHS for workplace chemicals. This modification to WHMIS is referred to as WHMIS 2015. The global harmonized system is an internationally uniform system in the way it classifies chemicals and in the way in which it communicates any potential hazards associated with those chemicals. The implementation is expected to improve worker health by ensuring standardized chemical information is contained in safety data sheets, or SDSs, as well as enhancing the opportunity for international trade. WHMIS warnings are contained as part of an established series of pictograms, which we will review in a minute. But before we do so, let's discuss what a pictogram is. A pictogram is a graphic image intended to provide an immediate indication of a hazard associated with a product. With a glance, a user can see whether a product is flammable or might pose a biological threat or some other kind of risk. The pictograms used in WHMIS have a distinctive square which is set like a diamond, that is, resting on one of its 4 points. Inside the border is a symbol which is intended to represent the potential hazard posed. Under WHMIS, pictograms are assigned to specific classes or categories of risk. Let's review these pictograms here.
Exploding bomb. The symbol of an object exploding is used to clearly signify that the material is explosive and risks combusting when handled improperly. These materials should be handled only by professionals, under safe conditions, and always handled with extreme care. Proper storage of these materials is paramount, as some may be sensitive to heat or light, and their explosiveness poses a massive risk for serious injury or death. Flame. These materials or products are prone to easy ignition and can burn rapidly. They should be handled with extra care and kept away from heat and open flames at all costs. Understand that for a fire to burn it requires oxygen, heat, and fuel, so these should never be brought anywhere near these materials. Flame over circle. Oxidizing materials are materials that are extremely reactive to oxygen and generate a large amount of heat when they come into contact with the element, even under mild conditions. These materials do not burn themselves, but will improve the likelihood of combustible materials around them for catching fire, such as wood, textiles or other flammable materials, with lower levels of heat needed to catch fire. Gas cylinder. This symbol is used to identify that the gas contained in a cylinder or other similar storage device is under high pressure and will be sensitive to punctures or leaks, providing the risk of explosions, or allowing the cylinder to turn into a makeshift projectile if the container is compromised. Oftentimes, the gases contained within these cylinders are hazardous themselves, so other hazard labels are often accompanied by a gas cylinder label. Corrosion. This signifies that the material can chemically react to materials or skin, destroying them in the process. This damage is devastating, and chemicals usually react immediately on contact. Extreme caution must be taken when handling these materials, with proper PPE being worn at all times when doing so. Some also have the potential to cause other adverse health effects in addition to corrosion. Skull and crossbones. This symbol has long been associated with death, and it is used in materials labeling to warn you that the relevant product has potential to be fatal, toxic, or extremely harmful, even with a limited exposure. This can be exposure through contact with skin, inhalation, or swallowing, and the specifics will be specified on the Safety Data Sheet, SDS. Proper handling should be taken extremely seriously with these materials. Health hazard. These materials will cause chronic health effects from disease, sickness, cancer, infertility, and more. While these materials, if contacted, may not cause serious injury or damage immediately, long-term exposure without proper protection can lead to very serious chronic health conditions. Proper PPE to protect from exposure is required to safely work in the vicinity of these materials. Exclamation mark. This symbol signifies less severe health effects from exposure, including irritation, inflammation, coughing, etc. Effects of exposure to these materials are generally treatable and have less of risk for long-term chronic health effects compared to materials under the WHMIS 2015 health hazard label. These materials should still be treated as dangerous, as some individuals may be more sensitive to the effects. Environment. While this label is not mandatory in Canada, it still may appear on imported materials or from suppliers that choose to highlight these hazards. These materials should be kept out of water sources, as they will harm aquatic life and lead to toxic impacts to the environment in those settings. These materials can also make their way into homes if treatment plants aren't equipped to remove them, so they are important to keep these materials out of water sources. Biohazardous infectious materials. This iconic symbol signifies that the material contains organisms harmful to our health by causing disease or other serious illnesses. These organisms include bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. This symbol will also be placed on containers for medical waste. Handling biohazardous materials requires extensive PPE, including hazmat suits. The risks associated with biohazardous materials are serious, and if you fear you have been exposed, seek medical attention immediately.